Hi guys, it's Amanda, and today I'm going to be talking about America's obsession with prodigy, precociousness, and the idea of becoming a self-made million entrepreneur by the time you're 30. In our culture, it seems that there's this notion that the younger you are when you achieve something, the more impressive and worthy of praise you and or that accomplishment is. For example, every NBC sports video involving someone under 20 years old never fails to mention their age in the title. 14-year-old makes the Olympic trials finals with terrific performance. Russian 15-year-old wins gold in stunning Grand Prix debut. And then everyone else is just like an impressive athlete. Like, what is it about young people doing amazing things that makes it so marketable to the point where it's permeated our cultural fabric and our expectations for ourselves? Obviously, at the most basic level, it's the novelty aspect that makes it interesting. It's kind of like looking at people with unusual talents at a freak show, except it's a 17-year-old winning a Nobel Peace Prize or a really talented 5-year-old singing on The Voice. Essentially, it's inspirational. It shows that you don't have to live that long to reach the peaks of human potential. Caroline Gregor of the Huffington Post notes, "When we're constantly being made aware of how young or old other people are and marking our lives by the milestones of hitting 25, 30, and so on, age becomes central to our identity. Obsession with youth also reflects and perpetuates a widespread societal fear of aging. Without a cultural ideal of old age, and even middle age, says psychoanalyst Erik Erikson, our civilization does not really harbor a concept of the whole of life." So in today's video, I want to explore the American obsession with youth, specifically high-achieving young people, and break it down into 3 different categories. First, the Wonderkins, then teens, and finally, young adults. Basically, all these age groups fall into people under 30 because in American culture, 30 is widely considered the end of one's youth, especially if you're a woman. Of course, kids and teens are considered young people, but as Americans have started to go to college at much higher rates and therefore get married and have kids later on in life, the decade of your 20s is considered very much youthful years, and popular media tends to paint turning 30 as the tipping point in adult life, where you have to get your shit together, and you no longer have the hope of being featured on the Forbes 30 under 30 list. So, I'm going to discuss topics concerning high-achieving youth within each of these age groups, and especially as we get to that last category, how these age-based measurements of success can be harmful and unrealistic. But first, I would like to thank BetterHelp for sponsoring today's video. BetterHelp is a professional online counseling service that securely assesses your needs and matches you with your own licensed professional therapist who you can start talking to within 48 hours of signing up. It's not a crisis line nor self-help, but there is a broad range of expertise in BetterHelp's 20,000 plus therapist network, which may not be available to you locally. BetterHelp is available worldwide. Anyone can use it, and you can log into your account anytime and send a message to your counselor. I know that if therapy wasn't available to me online, I probably never would have tried it, and I had many an existential crisis about what I'm doing in life. I'm not doing enough, and kind of relating to this video. So I'm so glad that I did. You get timely and thoughtful responses, plus you can schedule weekly video or phone sessions. BetterHelp is committed to facilitating great therapeutic matches, and they make it free to change counselors if needed. It's more affordable than traditional offline counseling, and financial aid is available. BetterHelp wants you to start living a happier life today. So visit betterhelp.com/AmandaMariana to join the over 1 million people taking charge of their mental health. That's BetterHelp to get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/AmandaMariana. So I want to start with the elementary years, ages 3 to 12, the kids with unusual talents and achievements for their age. Child prodigies are usually viewed as freaks of nature. No one really expects any 12-year-old to get a perfect score on the SAT or tour with an internationally renowned orchestra. It kind of just happens. Because of how rare child prodigies are, I feel like their impact on culture is quite harmless and limited to viral videos and novelty and Matilda, one of my favorite movies as a kid. These select few kids with talents and achievements at the adult level are viewed more as accidental products of nature because they have talents that don't seem teachable. Expectations for success at this stage are usually quite minimal because children don't have a ton of autonomy. While raising a child prodigy isn't something that most parents set out to do, in the past few decades there's been an increased emphasis on cultivating children's upbringing to increase chances for success later on in life, namely when it's time to apply to college. I recently saw a TikTok from a creator who was explaining how her mother was basically trying to prepare her to go to a top college since she was in elementary school. She explained that where she grew up there was kind of like a highly competitive academic culture, so this kind of upbringing was not unusual. So this reminded me of a study I learned about last semester in a sociology class from sociologist Annette Lareau on how parenting styles and consequently children's outcome in life diverge based on class lines. Lareau and her team observed 12 families with 10-year-old children for about 3 weeks to study the different households' parenting styles. Half were identified as working class and the other half middle class. She found that the middle class families practiced cultivated growth while the working class families practiced natural growth.
All the families loved their children, but they had different ideas about how they should best raise their children. And in working class families, the parents were often very clear and they would give directives. They would say, don't do that, cut it out. And that would be the end of the discussion. You almost never heard children do back talk with their parents or questioning their parents. By contrast, in middle class families, the children would talk a great deal, they would protest, they would whine, and they would badger their parents to get what they wanted.
Subsequently, Lareau coined the term concerted cultivation, which is the style of parenting that is commonly exhibited in middle-class and upper-class American families, and is also characterized by consciously developing language use and ability to interact with social institutions. A child that has been concertedly cultivated will often express greater social prowess in social situations involving formality or structure attributed to their increased experience and engagement in organized clubs, sports, musical groups, as well as increased experience with adults and power structure. While this pattern of child rearing holds no innate positive qualities, it has been linked to an increase in financial and academic success. I find this study to be really interesting because reflecting on my own life, I can see how some parts of my upbringing falls into that middle-class parenting style and therefore has influenced my achievements later on in life. For example, in middle school, my mom advocated for me to be placed into a more advanced math track so I could take an AP math class in high school. I still had to take a test to skip a year of class, but I wouldn't have had the opportunity to pass it unless my mom got in contact with the teacher and asked her. There's nothing inherently better about this middle class style of upbringing compared to natural growth in a vacuum, but in the context of the society we live in, concerted cultivation is rewarded. Another study that reminded me of Lareau's is found in a book called The Privileged Poor by Anthony Abraham Jack, who is a professor of education at Harvard University. Jack spent 2 years at an unnamed liberal arts college where he interviewed hundreds of students and found an interesting divide between low-income students at the school. The first group he dubbed the titular privileged poor, and the second group, equally alliterative, the doubly disadvantaged. The privileged poor were a group of students from low-income families who had the opportunity to attend private high schools due to generous scholarships. Despite what they lacked financially, the privileged poor accrued the cultural capital that afforded them a similar sense of belonging found in their wealthy peers. In addition, they felt academically prepared due to the competitive nature of their high schools. While the doubly disadvantaged also came from poor families, they attended local underfunded public schools, and the elite college setting was a culture shock to say the least. The study was incredibly nuanced and uncovered the minutiae of an elite college's culture and how it could feel incredibly alienating and inaccessible to students who lacked certain cultural capital. As we know from Lareau's study, a middle-class parenting style highly encourages children to advocate for themselves and think of themselves as equals to adults. Basically, it cultivates a sense of entitlement, which has a negative connotation, but I think it's one of the main features of this type of precocity that is valued and rewarded in American culture. I feel like the thing that successful young people have in common isn't always an unusually advanced skill or talent, especially as we're talking about successful young adults. One of the most important common threads is that these people feel like they have the right to people's time, attention, and money. So that was a long tangent on studies, and I'm trying not to stray too far from the point of this video, which is about unpacking America's obsession with precocity, but I feel like this is where it stems from. If you are afforded a concerted cultivation upbringing, you're likely to have parents who really want you to go to college, perhaps a top college, and as we know, the acceptance rates at highly selective schools have plummeted in the past few decades, which I think has really influenced the rise of middle-class Americans valuing precocity and high achievements at young ages. This brings me to the next age group, the teens. I think the teen years are pretty interesting in comparison to the 12 and under age group because this is when people start to gain more autonomy and self-awareness. Creativity and innovation seem to be rewarded more than just excelling in a purely academic way. I remember when I started to buy into this youth achievement complex in like 8th grade, so I was a huge Lorde fan. I still love her music, but I was truly in my stan era back then. I had an Instagram and Twitter fan account dedicated to her. It was a huge part of my life. One of the main things that really drew me to Lorde was the fact that what she sang about felt so relatable, but I was definitely shook when I realized she was only 16 when she released Pure Heroine, which of course included the now multi-platinum song Royals. I was probably 13 at the time, but knowing that she was so young and so talented and successful made me think, whoa, what am I gonna do that is nearly as impressive as this when I'm 16? In retrospect, I think this had more to do with the media coverage surrounding Lorde than my innate desire to make something like she made. I was not making music or drawings or anything really besides the occasional tweet that got 10 likes. A lot of the media coverage Lorde received early in her career centered around how young and precocious she was. She was a teen making music for other teens, of course, but it really held up in the eyes of adults and music critics, and eventually the Recording Academy, hence her 2 Grammys. I feel like the way I interpreted media coverage about Lorde was that the most interesting thing about her wasn't even the quality of her music, which was amazing, but the fact that it was so amazing because of how young she was. It's like youth is seen as inherently virtuous, especially in the entertainment industry, rather than just being the number of years you've orbited the sun. This framing definitely influenced my view of myself. Teen Vogue came out with a 21 under 21 list in 2016, and I was like, damn, I only have 5 years left to do something worth writing about. However, in a shocking turn of events, I was featured in a Teen Vogue article last year at the ripe age of 21, so maybe my 16-year-old self kind of manifested that. Anyway, I'm all for youth empowerment and young people doing cool things. It's great. I'm not trying to be a hater, but I do think it's worth analyzing how we talk about these people and their achievements. So now I want to get into the meat and toxicity of this young people's achievement obsession, the young adult years. In this age group, the bootstraps narrative and the hustle culture aspect of it is most blatantly pervasive. Exceptional stories about boyish billionaires are touted as proof that with enough frugality and hard work, anyone can become rich and successful at 30. The source of our arbitrary age obsession can largely be attributed to the blank under blank lists. It started with Fortune magazine's 40 under 40 list, which from 1999 to 2003 just ranked people in order of wealth, which tells us a bit about where the values of these list makers lie, but in 2009 the list rebranded as a subjective ranking of power and influence. There's actually only 40 people on the Fortune list every year, but one of the most popular listicles today Forbes 30 Under 30 actually features 600 honorees in 20 different industries, ranging from social media to games, finance, consumer technology, and social impact. The 30 Under 30 list was launched by Forbes editor Randall Lane in 2011, and since then, millennials have known no peace. The purpose of it? To answer important questions like, who is reinventing the world? Who should you hire today? Who will you be working for in 20 years? Who, in short, under the age of 30 matters? To put it lightly. That's actually the first sentence from the 2011 article. The first 30 Under 30 featured the likes of prodigious fashion blogger Tavi Gevinson, a 28-year-old Donald Glover, and writer, actor, producer who became the poster child for nepotism, Lena Dunham. I just have to touch on Lena Dunham for a second because I've done a video on my channel about nepotism, and at the time, I actually really didn't know much about Dunham, so I didn't bring her up. But since then, I've watched Girls and her film Tiny Furniture and have learned more about her career, so I've come to my own conclusion about her nepotism baby status. Early in her career, Lena Dunham was accused of benefiting from nepotism because both of her parents are somewhat well known in the contemporary art world. Her mom, Laurie Simmons, is a photographer, and her father, Carol Dunham, a painter. This is an unpopular opinion, but I don't think Lena Dunham has actually benefited from nepotism. I do think people have conflated her mom having a Wikipedia page and her parents' class position with nepotism, but the word that actually describes her situation best is just good old-fashioned privilege. I think you could say Lena Dunham benefited from nepotism if her parents worked in the same industry as her, which is Hollywood. I guess the fact that they're all in the general arts is where this confusion stems. But it's important to note that the film and TV industry is quite different from the contemporary art world. People resent Lena Dunham for many reasons, I know, but I think it just boils down to that a lot of her success comes down to the fact that she had the foresight to be born to wealthy parents. Wish I had thought of that. She attended private schools her whole life. Her parents seem to have paid for her college education and afforded her the luxury of not only financial but creative support. Her critically acclaimed feature film, Tiny Furniture, is what got her on HBO's radar, which led her to create and produce Girls. And you can't forget that Tiny Furniture was made for a mere $50,000, filmed in her parents' Tribeca loft, and stars her real mom and sister, who are non-actors, so sure, if anything, you could count those casting choices as nepotism. At the end of the day, she was lucky enough to have resources and privileges that allowed her to cultivate her creative skills and become successful at a young age. So I don't think it's nuanced enough to paint Dunham as a product of sheer nepotism. In fact, on these kinds of blank under blank lists, upper-class origins like hers seem to be far from the exception, but the rule. In a comically curmudgeonly piece for Slate, Simon Doonan declares that youth is the new global currency. He laments, "This extreme privileging and overpraising of jeunesse is a new phenomenon. People think the 1960s was youth-obsessed. Not so. Back then, it was all about being an adult, a suave, sexy grown-up, with access to the finer things of life." And keep in mind, this article was written in 2011, before the Forbes 30 Under 30 list came out, and before we'd seen the worst of our romanticization of young success. He quips, "The fetishizing and garlanding of youth has put the awards schedule into fast forward. At 22, you win most important fashion designer in history. By the time you hit 58, people are giving you a standing ovation while wondering if you can still whittle on your own. And whose fault is that? You mark my words, those overachieving brats are to blame." Of course, this piece is meant to be taken with a grain of salt, but what makes it funny is that it's based in truth. Putting youth achievement on a pedestal takes a mental toll on everyone, from older generations to young people who feel like we haven't done enough, to the wonderkins who've aged out of the fluorescent limelight their adolescence afforded them. This brings me back to music I was obsessed with in middle school. Taylor Swift. In the recently re-released version of her 2012 album Red, she included songs she wrote that didn't make the original cut. In one of my personal favorites, Nothing New, she reminisces on her fleeting youth, and keep in mind she wrote this song at 22. The bridge best encapsulates the theme. A Genius annotation reads, "Just like in The Lucky One, an earlier song on Red, Swift explores the concept of being an aging artist who sees younger artists take her place in these lines. While appreciating that they took inspiration from her work, she fears that as she gets older, younger artists will hold the title she had at their age. While the anxieties of an aging pop star seem far off from a plebeian's plight, Swift's worries seem to be on the pulse of millennial angst." Maud Standish, a millennial trend researcher, put it perfectly. "The allure of youth has culturally shifted from being about innocence to being about achievement. Many a millennial I know has spent a long night pondering their misspent youth after reading the horrible torture tool that is the 30 Under 30 article. This deep panic is different from what boomers experienced in their 20s, as many were capable of acquiring the trappings of adulthood early on. Thankfully for them, the economy made the dream of a house with a white picket fence a reality. Unfortunately, I don't think our cultural craze over youth achievement is going away anytime soon, but looking forward, it's important to contextualize young success stories, to acknowledge that no one has gotten to where they are in life simply by sheer willpower or work ethic. And secondly, if we continue to measure success in terms of how many accolades you can acquire by the time you're 30, we should at least ensure that people have equal access to opportunities to succeed. Anyway, I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. As usual, would love to hear your thoughts down below, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!